One evening, holy knights from the subjugation church head into the woods to hunt for a particular vampire named Eugene, our MC. After searching for a bit, they find him, and without wasting much time, the captain plunges his sword into Eugene's stomach, to his surprise. Apparently, Eugene is an extremely weak vampire who has long been hiding from humans. He then whispers to him that the church had spotted him half a year ago, but intentionally decided to delay his capture to build more tension among the people and gain attention. As expected, Eugene tries to fight back but ends up split in half like a loaf of bread by the captain. In his dying moment, he wonders if his entire existence was all in vain while wishing for a second chance. All of a sudden, he opens his eyes and finds himself in an old tent he used to live in before the church started hunting him. Based on the settings of the tent, he's able to figure out that he has somehow returned to the past, just before the church started hunting him. Being a weak vampire, Eugene has lived his entire life hiding in the woods from humans. Although he never thirsted for human blood by nature, he succumbed to his instincts one day, and that single mistake was what led the church to discover him. Since then, he has been living in fear and surviving purely by drinking the blood of beasts. Given that he has been granted another chance, Eugene decides to make the most of it. He heads deeper into the woods to find the master of the forest for a purpose. Since vampires absorb power from blood, the strength of the host would determine the amount of power they gain from consuming its blood. When he eventually locates the monster, it doesn't seem quite welcoming as it charges at him to attack. Given how weak he is, all the poor vamp can do is evade its attacks. Up until now, his entire survival strategy relied on erasing his presence, but now that he knows that's not going to save him anymore, he decides to change his approach. Determined to make just as little as a scratch on the monster's body, he charges at it with his sword, but to his surprise, it shatters completely upon making contact with the creature's tough scales. It is at this moment that he realizes he never stood a chance to begin with. The beast knocks him across the forest and he ends up crashing into a tree, badly injured. He had underestimated the strength of the beast. Beasts, generally regarded as roamers, are not dungeon monsters, but wild predators that wander the wilderness. Most roamers are known to appear in regions where there is mana. However, there are a few that show up in areas where there is no mana, often carrying their own mana crystals. He genuinely believes he could change the tides if he somehow got his hands on a mana crystal, but given the difference in their strengths, he knows he won't be getting a chance. The monster swoops him into a nearby pond and bites the upper half of his body, making Eugene regret throwing away his second chance as well. In the process of giving up, a glimmer of hope crosses Eugene's mind, and he realizes he can't keep living as a weakling. Determined to change the tide, he bites on the creature's tongue and sucks its blood, to its surprise. In that moment, the bald, chopped vampire transforms into an extremely ripped and majestic entity with glowing symbols all over his body. With his newly found motivation, Eugene crawls into the monster's mouth and absorbs its mana crystal, defeating it in the process. Now that he has attained this level of power, there's only one reasonable thing to do: to seize blood and victory. Still at the swamps, Eugene wonders to himself that all he wanted to do was drain enough blood from the monsters to become the master of the forest. But he has accidentally absorbed its mana crystal, making him even stronger. As a result, he now possesses the ability to turn his skin into dark scales, which could serve as a protective layer against the sun. He had found out about the forest monster when he was being hunted down by mercenaries in his past life. The monster had attacked some of the mercenaries and gotten slightly injured in the process. Eugene had then consumed some of its blood, which gave him enough power to take down a good number of the mercenaries before escaping. Even though he's now beaming with strength, Eugene knows that he still doesn't stand a chance against the knight who slayed him, so he decides he has to get stronger before taking any reckless action. Seeing how young Dirth, the knight, had easily found him, despite his hiding skills, Eugene concludes that he probably possesses the ability to find monsters, and that's why he knows hiding will not do him any favors. Shortly after, the sun begins to rise, so Eugene decides to head back to his tent, as it's too soon to test out his new powers. While he tries to leave, a little water spirit, which is used to not being seen, starts to curse him for dirtying the lake. However, it gets shocked when Eugene interrupts it, asking who it is. Surprised, the spirit switches up immediately and begins to glaze Eugene hard. It introduces itself as Mirian, the guardian of the lake. From Mirian's story, Eugene learns that it had originally been the master of the waters, up until the monster he defeated suddenly showed up 15 years ago and took over. The monster naturally would have discarded Mirian, but after realizing that other prey would not approach the dirty waters, it then enslaved Mirian because of its purification abilities. While Mirian thanks him for defeating the monster, Eugene notices one of the tattoos he has always had on his body has disappeared. He cannot recall memories from his early days, so he doesn't know how the tattoos got there in the first place. Seeing one of the 10 tattoos disappear, he assumes that he's probably being freed from a spell. Eventually, Eugene decides to leave, so he asks Mirian to protect the forest well, but Mirian is quite disappointed. Since people don't normally see it, it has been conversation deprived for a long time, and now the only person who can somehow see it wants to leave already. When it expresses its concern, Eugene tells it to focus on purifying the lake instead. Admitting that the process would take a while, Mirian tries to get him to stay by offering him some questionable purified water, but Eugene doesn't seem interested. Several days later, some villagers in a small town report to the village chief about a certain red-eyed monster, which has come back after a long time. Apparently, the red-eyed monster happens to be Eugene, and rather than posing a threat, he visits the village once every fortnight to offer them dead animals. This time around, he brought twice the number of animals he normally brings. When the village chief meets with him, Eugene reveals that he has been healed from his sickness and has come to share the good news. For the first time in the 10 years they've known each other, he unveils himself, and the villagers are shocked to see how majestic he looks. Some even wonder if he's a noble. He reveals that due to the help he has received from the village in the past, he has come to return the favor. He then tells them to call on him if they're ever in danger. When he leaves, Miriam, who was with him the whole time, asks why a vampire like him is being kind to humans, and he replies that mercenaries will soon arrive at the village and kill all the villagers. From his past life, the mercenaries had arrived to kidnap one boy, so they had decided to slay the entire village to eliminate all witnesses. He believes that if he doesn't stop that single incident, then the future where the Holy Knights swarm his place will come true. Miriam wonders how Eugene knows all these things, but decides to trust him since he keeps proving to be beyond the ordinary. Suddenly, they run into a group of mercenaries who mistake Eugene for a villager. Determined not to let him alert the rest of their arrival, one of the men charges at him to kill him, but Eugene beheads him easily with his bare hands. Eugene knows he has to gain the villagers' trust, but right now he has a bigger priority, testing out his new powers. Standing before the mercenary group in the woods, Eugene sees it as a good opportunity to test his strength. Seeing how Eugene had easily killed one of them with his bare hands, the mercenaries then realize that he's a vampire. Since vampires happen to have a bounty placed on them by the church, the men decide to try to capture him alive for the reward. However, when some of them charge at him for the purpose, they end up sharing the same fate as the first mercenary. Now recognizing that he's not an ordinary vampire, the mercenaries decide to kill him and take his head back with them. While some of them charge at him with their dangerous weapons, Eugene barely breaks a sweat as he kills them easily, leaving the rest of the mercenaries in despair. Night then begins to fall, and Eugene remarks that the rest of the mercenaries are definitely cooked. Later that night, Eugene leads the villagers to the mercenaries' corpses. When they ask if he was responsible, he responds that he had only stumbled upon their corpses on his way back to the village. He then shows them the dead bodies of some black wolves, which he claimed were responsible for the whole incident. He then tells them he had managed to take down some of the wolves, but a good number of them escaped. When the villagers examine the mercenaries' corpses, they find claw marks, so they conclude that the wolves were indeed responsible. Eugene tells them it'd be too risky to leave the bodies out in the open like that, so the villagers decide to bury them back in the village. Meanwhile, Miriam, who has been there the whole time, wonders why Eugene is so hell-bent on protecting his image and gaining the villagers' trust. He remarks that if they had left earlier, there wouldn't have been a need for the whole situation. He recalls that the wolves had shown up after Eugene massacred the mercenaries, so he had used the opportunity to frame them for their deaths. Miriam then concludes that for Eugene to be this careful, he probably has a serious plan. Shortly after, Eugene hands the village chief a letter which he claims to have found amidst the corpses. Checking the letter, the chief identifies the seal to be from Sir Terwin, their lord's household. When he reads it, he is shocked to learn that Felid, one of the villagers, might actually be Terwin's bastard son. A while before the Black Wolves showed up, the rest of the mercenaries realized that it was already too late to run, so they decided to fight to the death. Rather than taking turns to attack, they all chose to attack Eugene at once. But to their surprise, they still met the same fate. Eugene had spared one of the men intentionally and forced him to answer his questions. He had learnt from the man that they were sent by Lord Terwin's sons, Kamara and Verthel Terwin, to kidnap Felid to stir up political problems. Eugene knows the kind of person Verthel Terwin is, so he can say for a fact that a knight like him would never order a group of mercenaries to slaughter the villagers. He had then concluded that the massacre must have been the mercenaries' personal decision. In his past life, the disappearance of the entire village was what led to the search, which resulted in him being discovered by Verthel and young Dirth. After getting all the necessary information, he had killed the mercenary and dumped his body with the rest, before focusing on the wolves, which were already beginning to gather. When the villagers realize that they have to take Felid to Terwin's castle, they begin to panic because the mercenaries, whom they believe were meant to escort him back, are no more. In the midst of the pandemonium, Eugene then tells them he'd be willing to carry out the task on their behalf. When they tell him he doesn't have to go that length for them, he tells them it's nothing. He then decides to surprise them with the biggest secret about himself. His name is Jan Eugene, and he's actually a knight. Still out in the woods, the villagers are shocked to hear that Eugene is a knight. Although Miriam is quite worried that the villagers might see through his bluff, Eugene seems a little too relaxed. Based on the reaction he got from the villagers when they found out that Felid is Lord Terwin's son, he can tell that they've not seen a noble before. They ask why he has been moving and hiding for years, wondering if it's a kind of special knight training. But Eugene simply replies that, due to various circumstances, he had to cut ties with people and start living in the forest. The villagers then conclude that the reason he was able to survive on his own in the forest for so long is probably that he's a really skilled knight. The village chief appreciates Eugene but tells him that their village is poor and that they are not capable of compensating a knight of his status. Eugene tells him he doesn't have to worry, as he simply requests a place to rest his head for the night. Excited, the chief invites him to spend the night in his house. The following morning, when Eugene wakes up, he decides to experiment by coating his fingers with his dark scales and holding them out in the sunlight. He's then able to confirm that indeed, the scales block out sunlight, but only to an extent. Meanwhile, Miriam, who has been there the whole time, confronts him about what plans he could have to tell a lie like that. Eugene replies that humans have a tendency to trust a person's status more than their words, and that would save him a lot of stress. He adds that even though there's a chance that he might get discovered someday, it doesn't really matter because he intends to leave anyway. He then covers his body properly and heads out to prepare for the journey. Before he leaves with Felid, the village chief hands Eugene a note to hand over to Terwin so he doesn't get misunderstood. Setting out with the kid, Eugene determines that he's going to use him to become a real noble. While they advance, Eugene is quite surprised when he learns that Felid can read. Felid shares that although his late mother was of low status and didn't get any formal education, she had somehow taught him how to read. He's now shocked at the realization that the person who taught her might have been Sir Terwin. Eugene uses the opportunity to ask Felid to teach him how to read. And Felid is quite shocked because reading is fundamental knowledge for nobles. Eugene then explains that his family has long fallen and that all this while, it wasn't letters that kept him alive, but rather a sword. As expected, Felid buys the whole story and begins to respect him even more. He then shares that he once used to have doubts about Eugene because of the kinds of rumors people were spreading about him. But now he's going to try to judge him with his own eyes, rather than baseless rumors. He agrees to teach Eugene how to read so he won't have to feel embarrassed around others. While he asks Eugene to tell him more about himself, an arrow is fired from a distance towards Felid. Thanks to Eugene's sharp skills, he's able to stop the arrow right before it hits Felid in the eye. They then recognize the people responsible as bandits. While the bandits try to intimidate and rob them, Eugene loses his shit, so he draws his sword and beheads them one after the other, putting Felid in complete shock. After taking care of the bandits, he then wonders why humans like to prey on those weaker than themselves. He then turns to Felid, asking if this is something he'll also get to understand once he learns to read. He holds the little boy's face and tells him he's free to believe whatever he wants to believe, but assures him that as long as he's with him, no single drop of blood will touch his body. Continuing their journey, Eugene and Felid get to a market where they witness some people being ripped off by some greedy merchants. Felid then tells Eugene about how the village chief always gets riled up at the way things are handled anytime he follows him to the trading arena. He then warns Eugene in case he intends to carry out any trades that he should be careful as well so he doesn't get ripped off too. Eugene, however, is dead broke, so he knows that he has to at least have money before he can decide whether to be careful or not. He then decides to sell some of the black wolf leather he had taken along. When he presents them to a shopkeeper, the man seems impressed, as that kind of leather is quite difficult to come by, considering the amount he had brought as well. The shopkeeper looks at him closely to analyze his clothes, and after confirming that Eugene is just a wanderer, he sees him as an easy target to rip off. The man tells Eugene that the damage to the leather is too much, and for that reason, he'll only be paying him 18 silver coins for it. When he looks Eugene in the eyes and notices his piercing gaze, he gets chills, so he decides to increase the pay to 23 silver coins. The process then keeps repeating itself until the man agrees to pay 30 silver coins for the leather. Clueless, Eugene agrees, and they finalize the trade. Later that evening, while Eugene, who had changed into some fancy clothes, sits by the fireside staring at a bunch of letters on a paper, Miriam compliments his clothes. Eugene, who didn't realize why the shopkeeper kept adding to the price of the leather, had assumed he was simply a nice person. Miriam tells Eugene he should have gotten even nicer clothes, but Eugene replies that he only needs something that can help him block out the sunlight. Miriam then cuts in, stating that as a vampire, Eugene is meant to be living a life of luxury rather than roaming around in mid-clothing. With the amount of knowledge Miriam possesses, Eugene wonders if Miriam only lived in a swamp as he claims. Miriam then explains that he was originally in the spirit realm and that was where he learnt everything he knows. Felid then shows up shortly after and asks Eugene who he's talking to. Not wanting to reveal Miriam's identity, Eugene simply answers that he was talking to himself. Felid then apologizes for his unruly display. Apparently, while skinning a rabbit, he had remembered the incident where Eugene beheaded the bandit group earlier that day, triggering him to start throwing up. After settling down, he decides to resume teaching Eugene how to read and write. Due to his fast assimilation process, Eugene already understands some words, but the characters still seem like worms to him. He asks Felid if learning is originally meant to be this easy, and Felid replies that he just happens to be a genius. He then goes ahead to brag about how he was also a fast learner back when his mother was teaching him. Eugene points out that simply knowing how to read and write might not be enough for Felid to become a noble's child overnight, and he agrees. While Felid admits that he's not actually expecting Lord Terwin to welcome him openly, they get interrupted by some mercenaries who ask if they can camp with them. Analyzing their weapons and formation discipline, Eugene can tell that they're real mercenaries, unlike the ones he had slaughtered. When the men ask where they're headed, Eugene realizes that lying would only draw suspicions. So he tells them. Coincidentally, the mercenaries happen to be headed in the same direction. They ask for a space to camp in exchange for alcohol, water, and meat. But Eugene can't help but feel suspicious. When the captain and one other mercenary introduce themselves, Eugene tells them he's a knight, causing them to raise their eyebrows. Raybon, one of the men, believes Eugene is faking it, so he calls him out on the spot, trying to get him to admit who he really is. According to what he knows, knights are expected to own horses and fancy armor, and with the looks of things, Eugene owns neither. Besides, he points out that he has never heard of him or his family in the first place. Since Eugene had already told Felid he's a knight, he concludes that taking it back is not an option. He knows the mercenaries have simply come for a place to camp, but he makes up his mind that if they keep pressing him like this, then things are bound to get ugly. Besides, judging from their number, he's pretty confident that he can kill them all. He then slowly reaches for his sword and prepares to do the needful once more. While in the forest, Eugene glares at Raban, who accuses him of faking his knightly status. He considers the option of killing all the mercenaries, but as he reaches for his sword, Partek, the captain, grabs Raban and knocks him out with a punch. Eugene and Felid are shocked at the turn of events, but Partek apologizes to Eugene for Raban's rudeness by bowing to him and calling him sir, and this stuns his fellow mercenaries. Eugene accepts his apology and tells him to settle close to his group. While Partek gracefully accepts, Eugene notes that he has to become a real knight as soon as possible to avoid pointless suspicion. A while later, after the mercenaries make a campfire not too far away from Eugene's, Raban wakes up abruptly, and he momentarily suffers from an existential crisis while wondering where he is. Annoyed, Partek calls him an idiot and asks him how he could rush at a knight without having any sense of fear. He corrects the boy by whacking him on the head and telling him that they are alive because of him. He scolds Raban, who does not understand what's so scary about Eugene. Partek tells Raban that he shouldn't judge based on appearances only. Partek starts by telling Raban that Eugene is dressed in a lycanthrope leather worn that the price would at least cost over 10 silver coins. Upon learning the amount, Raban freaks out after learning it's at least 3 times more than his monthly pay. Partek then reveals that he saw Eugene reading earlier, so being learned makes him above an average person. Partek goes on, describing how Eugene was very close to drawing his sword earlier due to Raban's foolish remarks, and they all could have gotten killed, or better still, 2 mercenaries might have survived. Surprised, Raban asks Partek how he knows that, and Partek tells him that he noticed Eugene's right hand in his robe and his left foot drawn slightly back. Based on that stance, he knew how skillful Eugene was at being able to set the center of gravity to match his sword, so he had to quickly intervene to avoid Raban's head from flying off. Raban then yells at Partek, saying Partek could have stopped him. In disbelief, Partek realizes that Raban doesn't know how strong knights really are, so he clues him in by explaining who a knight is. A knight is someone born into an old family who wields a sword from when they are little and trains all their life, honing their skills to know how to kill professionally. They willingly enter dungeons to slay monsters and then head back to cut down humans while accumulating military achievements. They are eventually recognized by nobles and officially appointed as knights. Eugene tells him that impersonating a knight is a serious crime, but what's worse is that if Eugene is a fake, then he can't be normal because it means he's very confident in his swordsmanship. Only a very few get chosen to be a knight, so for Eugene, who looks so young to claim such a title, it's better if he's real than a fake. Worried, Raban asks Partek if Eugene is stronger than him, and Partek suspects that to be the case. He then points out that Eugene is heading for Terwin's castle, so there's a high possibility that Eugene's reason is to enroll in the dungeon exploration nearby. Sensing that their destination is the same, Partek knows he'll run into Eugene. Eugene, who has been quietly listening in on them, learns how much weight the title of a knight carries. He examines the team and notes they are proper mercenaries, so he wonders why the Terwin family hired the people he slaughtered earlier when there were more capable people. Eugene finds it odd, but he shrugs it off and meets with Partek and Raban to suggest that they travel together since their destination is the same. Raban and Partek get blinded by how dazzling Eugene looks, and they accept the offer. The following day, they arrive at Martella, one of Terwin's territories. As they walk through the town, Eugene notes that since his disguise still works, he can pick up some useful information before arriving at their destination. What worries him is what'll happen after getting to Terwin. Suddenly, Mirian appears and informs him that he was able to gather information from the mercenaries about Lord Terwin. Apparently, the old man's health is so bad that he can die at any moment. Also, there's a new dungeon which was recently discovered in the territory, which, if cleared by the family, they could make a fortune. Unfortunately, the family lacks both money and troops, so they can't open the dungeon for exploration. Mirian, who is worried about Felid, asks what will happen to him if Terwin's lord dies because the kid will become an orphan and will be prone to assassination. But to his surprise, Eugene doesn't care. Eugene looks back at Felid and wonders if Felid was summoned because his father wants to see him before he dies. He notes that their fates are going to change from that moment. After a while, they arrive at Rose Castle, which belongs to the House of Terwin. They see how big the place is, and Killian tells Eugene to climb up the ranks as fast as possible so he can live in such a castle. Upon arriving at the castle gate, Kamara Terwin, the eldest son, stops them and asks for their business. Partek introduces his men to Kamara, saying they are a mercenary troop sent by the Piling Company. Once Kamara learns that the mercenary has brought their goods, he lets them in and asks them to offload. Eugene, on the other hand, walks separately from them, so Kamara asks who he is, and Eugene introduces himself as a knight, which shocks Kamara, but before he can state his business, another voice calls out to Kamara, angry at him for doing his work. Eugene immediately recognizes the voice and sees it's Vethril, the commander of the vampire hunting unit who first discovered his hideout and tormented him in the past. At the castle gate, Vethril asks his brother why he's doing his job, then Kamara reminds him who the heir is and how he doesn't need permission to do what he wants. While the brothers argue, Eugene shows Vethril the letter from Brosdwin's chief GEV, but before Vethril grabs the letter, Eugene gives it to Kamara. Kamara reads it and learns about how the mercenaries sent to bring Felid got killed by wolves. He learns Felid is their father's bastard son and their new brother. He greets Felid politely, saying their dad has been waiting for him. As for Vethril, he stares daggers at the boy and then orders his men to take Felid in and freshen him up. Felid is shocked when a guard grabs him and takes him in. As Vethril angrily takes his leave, Eugene tells him to wait and wants to discuss his reward. He asks Vethril to permit him to meet the lord of the castle, but Vethril angrily disagrees. He tells Eugene that their father isn't well, so he'll pay him in gold coins and demands that Eugene leave. Eugene emphasizes how hard he worked to get to the castle, but Vethril glares at him, ordering him not to repeat himself. To his surprise, Kamara agrees. The heir sees no big deal. After all, they are going to introduce Felid to their father, so there's no issue with Eugene seeing him. Vethril disagrees, saying their father doesn't wake up during the day, and it would be unwise for a stranger to see him. This makes Kamara tease him, indirectly reminding him who the heir of the house is. He then apologizes to Eugene, saying he can't meet with their father based on the schedule Vethril has provided. With that, he dismisses Eugene and takes Felid inside. Eugene realizes that Kamara had no intention of letting him see their father from the very beginning. Suddenly, a tall man carrying multiple men calls out to Vethril and dumps the men on the floor like a sack of potatoes. He explains to the shocked noble that the men were caught stealing from the villagers instead of training, so he brought them to him. He then asks Vethril for permission to kill one of them to serve as an example to the others. Vethril, who doesn't want Eugene to learn of his household affairs, urges the huge dude indoors to discuss their matter. Partek watches from behind and tells Eugene that the huge man is a knight with a bright future named Galfredik. Partek knows Galfredik as the knight who placed third in the Evergrow family tournament. That day, the knight swept through more than 1,000 competitors with his monstrous strength and skills. Confused, Eugene wonders what a talented knight like Galfredik is doing in Tirwin, and Partek assumes it's related to the newly discovered dungeon. Partek states that it's a great achievement for a knight to successfully open a dungeon, even though it's far from the capital, because it's very difficult to open one, and a lot of people lose their lives. Partek assumes Galfredik is planning to use the dungeon as a stepping stone to get hired by a bigger family. After hearing Partek out, Eugene confirms that Partek has done his quest, so he offers to hire him. Later that evening, Kamara watches Vethril and Galfredik punish the mercenaries who had stolen from the villagers earlier. Kamara vows to open the dungeon this time around. He notes how Vethril has been openly going after the successor position ever since their father's health declined. Kamara notes that Vethril is also trying to open the dungeon, since it must be the reason he brought Galfredik over. While lost in thought, wondering who to employ to help open the dungeon, Kamara hears a knock on his door. His servant then tells him Eugene wants to see him. Surprised that Eugene is still around, Kamara lets him in. As soon as Eugene walks in, Kamara tells him to have a seat and assures him that Felid is in safe hands. He promises Eugene that their father will reward him as soon as he wakes up. Kamara then thanks Eugene for handing him the letter earlier, and Eugene tells him it's only natural since he only has business with the lord of the estate, so he was surprised when a third party intervened. Amused, Kamara asks him what he wants, believing Eugene wants to be certified by meeting the lord of the house. Eugene affirms it's one of his goals, but then raises an offer. He asks Kamara to let him join the dungeon raid. Kamara is surprised by the request and he bursts out laughing. He calls Eugene an interesting fella, and after observing Eugene's messy outfit, he remembers Eugene calling himself a knight, and from what he heard, Eugene had killed about 5 robbers in a dungeon raid. Kamara then asks him why he's participating in the raid and if it's to boost his image. Eugene crosses his legs and tells Kamara the offer won't do him any harm because he wants only 100 silver coins and half the dungeon loot, excluding the monastones. After hearing him out, Kamara says the little reward Eugene is asking for is more of a reason for him to get suspicious. Eugene then turns the tables on him by reminding Kamara that he isn't the one in a corner, but Kamara. In Kamara's office, Eugene proposes and Kamara checks him out. Based on Eugene's state of clothes, Kamara concludes that Eugene must be a wandering knight with no house backing him. Kamara knows how some knights fight for honor, so he classifies Eugene as one of them since Eugene isn't demanding much. When Eugene reminds Kamara of how backed in a corner Kamara is, the heir is shocked to know how far Eugene has read into them and how smart he is to know which card to play. He smirks as he learns that Eugene is different from most knights he knows, so he accepts Eugene's deal. While briefly staring at Kamara's hand, Eugene recalls Partek informing him about how hard mana crystals are to purify, as well as the high cost required to get them done. Partek had promised to introduce Eugene to a trading company to help him sell the mana crystal byproducts. Partek had advised Eugene to just tell Kamara that he would just be taking the byproducts, and that way, Kamara would have no choice but to accept the proposal. A while later, Vethril hears the news of his brother recruiting another knight to join in the dungeon raid, so he considers it a waste. Galfredik then mentions how dangerous dungeons are, so he tells Vethril that he is against it if the knight is some half-baked amateur. Vethril then mentions how he's also on the same page because he believes Kamara doesn't have connections to get a good knight since he doesn't get along with neighboring nobles, nor does he have a large network. Seeing that they are on the same page, Vethril asks Galfredik to tell the knight how they feel. As Galfredik wonders why Vethril is dumping the work on him, they hear footsteps, and shortly afterwards, Kamara shows up. He then introduces Eugene as his new knight who will work with the mercenaries and join the dungeon subjugation party. Surprised to see Eugene again and seeing the squad Eugene plans to lead, Vethril tells his brother that they cannot hire someone whose origins and skills are unknown. Kamara agrees he doesn't know Eugene's origins, but then he tells Vethril he can vouch for Eugene's skills. He starts by informing his surprised brother about how he heard that Eugene had used just a short sword to kill the bandit group that had been terrorizing their territory all this time. As Kamara vouches for Eugene, Galfredik throws a dagger at Eugene, but Eugene parries it at the last minute. Everyone is shocked by the sudden occurrence. Galfredik then apologizes for his rudeness. He walks up to Eugene and says Eugene seems to have grown up quite sheltered since he doesn't have scars or sunburn. He then asks Eugene if he can test his skills. A few moments later, the two knights are in an arena, and upon hearing about the duel, the townsfolk hurry there to witness Galfredik, the man who not only came third in a knight's tournament, but is rumored to possess the strength to rip apart a beast with his bare hands. As they gather, many of them already feel sorry for Eugene before the match starts. Galfretic smiles as the match is about to begin. He takes out his sword, strikes the knight dueling pose, and Eugene does the same, and it surprises the huge knight. The referee signals the commencement of the match, and the men clash evenly with their swords. Galfretic then beckons Eugene to come at him, and Eugene charges right at him. He pressures Galfretic, sending the huge knight to be on the defense, or so it seems to the average spectator. Partek then explains to Raban, who is cheering for Eugene, that Galfretic is simply sizing Eugene up and is willingly letting himself be pushed back. Galfretic parries all of Eugene's attacks and notes that they are cruder than he expected. He cannot see a particular style of fighting, and he notes that Eugene isn't a polished swordsman. Still, Eugene gives the vibe of a person who grew up in the wild. As Galfretic deflects Eugene's thrust, he asks Eugene to confirm the authenticity of him being a knight. At the arena, Galfretic confirms Eugene isn't a knight. He calls Eugene's stance sloppy and says Eugene is just relying on his physical abilities. The huge knight tries to educate Eugene on what it means to be a knight, but Eugene tells him he talks a lot. Galfretic then promises to shut up if Eugene beats him up. The huge knight then goes on the offense, surprising Eugene by almost making a see-through hole through his neck, but Eugene parries the attack by deflecting it to the side. Galfretic then follows up with a heavy swing, which pins Eugene's sword to the ground. Then he throws a roundhouse kick with his weight, but Eugene quickly holds up his sword to block it. He stops Galfredic's shoe sole from being printed on his cheek, but the force sends him crashing into the wall. While others are shocked by the outcome, Vethril considers it expected, so he asks eagerly if Eugene has passed out, but to his surprise, Eugene asks him who did, and then charges right at Galfretic. He strikes Gal quickly, and the huge knight notes that Eugene learns quickly. Gal parries the attack and tries to slash at Eugene, but Eugene evades it before returning a wide slash with all his might. Gal does the same, and their sword shatters upon contact. The crowd watches in awe as the men drop their broken swords and clamp their hands. Eugene overpowers Gal, and for the first time, Gal is surprised that a smaller man is physically stronger than him. He admits Eugene's strength, but then plans to use his superior experience against the self-proclaimed knight. Gal pulls Eugene close to him, causing Eugene to lose his stance. The crowd is shocked to see Eugene fall to the ground, and they watch as Gal follows up with a fist to pound Eugene. To everyone's surprise, Eugene gets back on his feet and then draws Gal close to him, causing the big guy to lose his balance. He then swings his fist at the huge knight. Gal, who already realizes Eugene's learning rate, wonders where he came from. He sees the fist home in on him and admits it's his loss. Immediately, the blow connects. It sends the big guy flying through the crowd and crashing into a distant wall, causing Gal to pass out. Shocked, the referee announces Eugene's victory, and the entire crowd roars at the result, having witnessed an underdog rising to the top. Among the people celebrating, Raban praises Eugene, calling him the mercenary's great knight. Partek simply watches as the same Raban who initially didn't like Eugene gas him up. A few seconds later, Gal wakes up like a zombie and walks up to Eugene. Contrary to what everyone expects, he raises Eugene by the hand and tells everyone to give him a round of applause. The crowd erupts, chanting one name, Jan Eugene. Everybody rejoices, but Vethril is pissed at the results. Eugene notes that from that night, people's gaze changed 180 degrees. The next day, while Kamara asks Eugene if he slept last night, the maids stare at Eugene with admiration. Kamara notes that Eugene refused all the amenities he sent to him. Suddenly, Raban storms, looking for Eugene, and he bows deeply while asking Eugene if he called. Kamara sees Raban's earnest behavior and says he likes him. Galfretic also shows up out of the blue and clings to Eugene like they are best buds. Eugene tries warning him not to cling to him so much, but the brawn of a knight shows him his face and tells him he couldn't get a wink of sleep. He brags about his facial condition, and Eugene wonders if Galfretic wants to get hit some more. The huge fella then asks for Eugene's schedule to know if he's free so that they can spar. Based on Gal's reactions, Eugene learns that Gal doesn't care if Eugene was genuinely a knight or not. Later that day, they present Eugene a delicious feast, but Eugene stares at the meal coldly. His manservant and maid, whom Kamara had assigned to prepare his meals, act jovial towards him and try to make things up to his standard as swiftly as possible. Miriam then appears and has fun watching how worried Eugene is, knowing fully well that if he eats the food prepared for him, it'll trouble his system. While the hater watches with amusement, Eugene accepts the workers' sentiments before telling them he'll handle his meal by himself. Worried, they try talking him out of it, but Eugene tells them to tell Kamara he meant it when he said he liked being alone. This is because Eugene has been used to living alone for over a dozen years. Now that he's growing less suspicious, which means that more people will get cozy with him. Several days later, Eugene hasn't gotten used to people swarming around him. During that time, Gal tries to convince him once more to have another spar, but Eugene refuses. Suddenly, Felid shows up to greet Eugene while looking beat up. Everyone around is horrified at his state, and they see him ask Eugene if he's been well. That night in Vethril's chambers, Vethril punishes a mercenary by attacking him with knives for failing to get rid of Felid as he had originally planned with the fallen group. Pissed, he blames the injured mercenary because if they had done a good job, Eugene wouldn't be in their castle, and Vethril's plans wouldn't have gone off the rails. The injured man begs for forgiveness, believing the men were capable before he gave them the mission. Vethril, on the other hand, doesn't take his word for it since the report notes that the failed mercenary group died to wolves. He grabs the man and gouges out his eyes while everyone in the room is horrified by the sight and the screams. After getting his fill, Vethril wonders how to get rid of Felid since he cannot kill him in the castle. An idea suddenly popped into Vethral's mind, so he plans to execute it, believing that it'll also help him dispose of Felid nicely and clean. Later that night, Eugene speaks with Felid, and he learns that Vethral has ordered Felid to go join the dungeon subjugation. Felid complains because he had known that coming to the castle would lead to his death, but he didn't expect he'd be sent to the opening of the dungeon. Eugene then reveals how the mercenaries who were slaughtered by wolves were sent by one of his brothers, which meant that the mercenaries were initially on the way to the village to harm him. Despite all the despair going through Felid's mind, Eugene tells him there's a way for him to live, and for that, he must become Eugene's servant. Eugene breaks it down to him, explaining that Felid has already celebrated his coming-of-age ceremony, which makes him an adult who doesn't need a guardian's consent. Eugene tells Felid that he can continue holding his breath while waiting for someone to put an end to him, or he can struggle to the very end. On the day of the dungeon opening, the mercenaries and everyone involved gather at the dungeon's entrance. There, Heretic tells them that based on the dungeon's size, they should expect goblins and kobolds as low-rank monsters, then trolls and spiders as mid-rank. The issue is that he cannot predict the high-ranked monsters, so Gal tells them their goal is to clear paths in the dungeon till they get to mid-ranked monsters, and if at all they come across any high-ranked monster, they should retreat immediately. To start things, Gal sends scouts to scout the area for burrows near the dungeon. While at it, some men discuss how they're lucky their roles don't involve scouting. One of them plans to fake an injury after clearing low ranks. He explains how first-time dungeon raids are crazy, and he, being a rear guard, isn't good because rear guards aren't usually taken care of. He isn't ready to die off like a dog, especially since the pay isn't good. As he continues ranting, Vethral bumps into him while looking for Felid. At first, the mercenary nearly loses his life for his slip-up, but then directs Vethral to the boy chatting with Eugene. Felid, on the other hand, gives Eugene a bag filled with goodies while pleading that Eugene return safely. Upon seeing Felid, Vethral shoves the mercenary away and goes straight to meet the boy. He looks at Felid coldly while reminding him to take his position, hoping Felid hasn't forgotten. The boy senses trouble, so he instinctively hides behind Eugene, and this pisses Vethral off. Vethral then grabs Felid's arm and yells at him condescendingly, asking if he's gone deaf. He tries yanking Felid away from Eugene, but Eugene interferes by grabbing the noble's hand. He warns Vethral not to lay a finger on Felid and tells Vethral that he's spouting ridiculous words. Eugene asks Vethral if he has lost his mind because he naturally shouldn't expect a boy whose experience with a blade is as that of a kitchen knife to perform well in a dungeon raid. Vethral slaps Eugene's hand for being disrespectful, and he says he only wishes to raise Felid to be strong. Vethral then tells Eugene to know his place. He informs Eugene that Eugene has no right to yank Felid around like a puppet. To his surprise, Eugene stands his ground, and he informs Vethral that Felid became his servant last night, and everyone around them can attest to it. With the crowd watching, Eugene tells Vethral that they share a bond thicker than blood, which means that if Vethral lays a single finger on Felid, he'll consider it a challenge to him. Eugene moves close to him and unsheathes his sword for a bit, while indicating that he can use Vethral for practice if Vethral violates the rule he just made. Vethral gets mad at them all and yells, saying that taking care of another family's bastard child is not as easy as they think, and if they think they are helping Felid, they will just block the boy's future. On the contrary, some merchants happily discuss the expected raid because not only do they have 2 knights whom they believe they can never match up to, but there are also a lot of skilled mercenaries. Vethral gets worked up after listening to the men drowse his threats. Suddenly, Kamara shows up and offers support to Felid, sticking with Eugene. He reminds Vethral that Felid has undertaken his coming-of-age ceremony, which means the boy is an adult and he can make his own decisions. While watching the siblings, Eugene notes that Felid is a prey that the predator has confirmed, and the best situation for the weak boy is to form a pack. Eugene watches as Vethral, the predator, cannot do anything to Felid, who is surrounded by strong people. Suddenly, a scout returns from his trip and he informs them that there isn't any trace of roamers nearby, so no monster has escaped the dungeon's burrow. With that, the team proceeds with the dungeon opening. The giant dungeon doors open and the mercenaries prepare to follow the knight. Just before they enter, Heretic turns to them and tells them their lives are in their hands. The 6 words echo in their minds as they cautiously prepare for battle. In one word, Heretic orders them to advance, and they all follow suit. As the dungeon door closes, Kamara and Felid tell Eugene to be careful and that they'll meet in 4 days. After going several meters into the dungeon, the party is attacked by hordes of goblins. The rascals pour in nonstop and the humans grow wild, slaughtering them. While some of them do the bare minimum by trying to stay alive, some archers follow Gal's instructions to shoot down the wall-crawling goblins trying to break into their formation. The lighthearted try running back to the dungeon door to escape, but they realize they've been surrounded by goblins. Thankfully, Gal shows up and talks some sense into them. He announces that they are at their safest when they are together. So he hurls his men back into position and yells at them to fight. After witnessing their poor performance, Gal notes that he is at fault for hurriedly selecting the mercenaries for the mission. Now he wonders how he plans to subjugate the dungeon with such people. Suddenly, Gal hears that more monsters are approaching from the rear and right ahead. He curses while demanding that they switch to a 2-pronged formation, but to his surprise, Eugene dashes into the rear to solo the monsters. Gal tries warning him how dangerous it is to go in alone, but within seconds, he hears clanking noises. They are shocked when they see Eugene's mask flying towards them, so Gal quickly orders Partek to follow him. As they run to the rear, Gal wonders how far Eugene ran within that short period. He suddenly stops when he sees Eugene holding a glowing flower and reporting how he has killed all the goblins that appeared at the crossroads. The weirdo then shows them the plant, while wondering what it is. They are all shocked that Eugene doesn't even know what the plant is. Yet he's that strong. After taking out the monsters on site, the party takes a break and treats the wounded. While at it, a squad meets Eugene and show him the mana crystals they've gathered. Eugene looks at the crystals disappointedly after noting that the ratio and the amount of monsters they've killed so far don't match up. Not only that, the crystals are very small in size, and they are blue compared to what he got from the roamer. Mirian appears and also looks disappointed after seeing the crystals. He notes that the quality of a mana crystal is directly proportional to the strength and size of the monsters. Curious, Eugene asks Mirian if wild roamers have bigger crystals. Mirian disagrees, saying that roamers are simply monsters that escape from the dungeons, and it doesn't necessarily mean they'll have bigger crystals. Mirian says roamers with big crystals are rare and hard to find. As Eugene thinks back on that alligator, calling himself lucky for getting its crystal, Mirian concludes, based on the rate they are getting crystals, that it's pointless to gain favor and enter dungeons from nobles. As he wonders if there are high monsters in the dungeon, a scream echoes loudly. Upon hearing it, Gal complains about not getting time to rest, and he orders his men to get back into their formation. To his surprise, they look like they'll collapse anytime soon, so Gal angrily informs them that he and Eugene will be at the front lines while they trail behind. To avoid any slackers, Gal threatens to punish anyone caught running away. Eugene is surprised that he's been positioned in the front line since it's his first time in a dungeon, but Gal explains that the mercenaries aren't being helpful, so Eugene will have to step up. Also, the monsters they are about to face aren't a walk in the park. Gal points to the silhouette, noting that the monsters there are the ones who control the goblins as foot soldiers. This means they are about to face some intermediate level monsters. If they eventually beat the monsters, then high-ranking monsters will be waiting for them in the core of the dungeon's depths. As Eugene quietly listens, he recalls gaining his hardening ability from his battle with the wild roamer. Now he wonders what other ability he'll gain if he consumes another mana crystal. He then tells Eugene that he can hear at least 50 footsteps about 100 meters away from them, and there are heavier ones behind them. Curious, Gal hands Eugene a spear and asks him to throw it towards the monster. Eugene takes the spear and flings it with all his might. The object crashes into a troll, and everyone immediately charges to fight the incoming monsters. Eugene charges head-on, so Gal orders his men to follow and support him. The men obey as instructed, and then try telling Eugene they've come to support him, but they freeze up on seeing Eugene leap on the troll and cut its eye. Eugene cuts the fingers and stabs it in the head. On that day, the definition of knighthood was engraved in the eyes of those who witnessed Eugene in battle. The very definition that humans knew as the characteristics of a knight was flipped when they saw Eugene do battle. In Eugene's case, his style of fighting was far beyond admiration, but the style of a bloody beast. After killing a swarm of goblins, they decided to rest for a little while and aid the injured, but the mercenaries were shaken by trauma. Crema noticed that most of their combat strength had lost the ability to push on any further. However, it was not due to physical fatigue. It was mental exhaustion caused by the scene Eugene had created. Crema knew they could advance no more and decided to tell Eugene that they should withdraw as they had already achieved the target they had set. However, Eugene responded that he was not tired yet and insisted it would be a waste to turn back, since they didn't know when the next subjugation would occur. Eugene added that they were free to return first, but Crema shouted that they just had to advance together, which terrified the already exhausted mercenaries. Eugene stepped down from the corpse of the huge goblin he had just slain and ordered Crema to lead the subjugation party out of the dungeon, informing him that only he and his mercenaries would proceed. Crema realized that Eugene had noticed the mercenaries' fatigue and was choosing to be considerate. He began to think of Eugene as a warm-hearted knight who cared for soldiers weaker than himself, hidden behind a sharp exterior. Crema, having no other choice, turned around and followed Eugene, thinking that Eugene was a man who made him reconsider what a knight truly was. A moment later, Eugene and his mercenaries headed deeper into the dungeon. On the way, Robin complained about getting swept up in the situation, yet he comforted himself by thinking that Eugene was strong enough to take down a troll by himself, which meant he could handle everything. Then Robin stepped on something, and when he lifted his foot, he saw it was a small spider. However, when he looked up, he saw a swarm of them hanging from the ceiling. This cave great spiders are monsters that live in groups and melt and consume their prey with powerful acidic poison. Suddenly, the spiders jumped down and crawled toward them at top speed. Partek informed him that they should retreat because there were too many spiders. However, Eugene simply swung his sword at the spiders around them, killing them instantly, and replied that their numbers were nothing to him. Partek shouted to Raban that they were joining the fight, to which Raban responded that they were already fighting. They all start cutting the rushing spiders into pieces. Unfortunately, Raban couldn't keep up and was pinned by the spiders. One of the spiders was about to bite his head off. Fortunately, Eugene slashed it in half in time, saving him from being killed. Raban looked up and saw that all of the spiders had been killed. He praised Eugene for being incredible, but suggested they should turn back. Raban then looked to his captain for backup, but Partek was completely silent, staring at the ceiling while shaking in fear. Among the roamers, even within the same species, there are different ranks. However, they rarely encounter the higher ranks, so they are not even considered when forming a subjugation party. Yet Partek saw the higher-ranked variant of the cave great spider in front of him. It was ranked Lord. Partek shouted urgently to Eugene that they should retreat, as they wouldn't be of any help against a higher-ranked spider lord. But Eugene simply called their names with seriousness, making both of them feel a strong aura from him. He ordered them to withdraw, declaring that the Spider Lord was his prey. Partek, sweating in fear, replied that he understood, and they both ran as the strange sensation made them lose control of their own bodies. Marion laughed as he watched the two run off, and told him that those two had instincts that had surrendered to the difference in strength between them and him. He asked Marion if the Lord was a roamer on par with the Master of the Swamp, but Marion replied no and explained that the Lord's level was even stronger than the Master of the Swamp. Yet he didn't care, because all he cared about was that the Spider Lord's mana crystal was even bigger than the Master of the Swamps. The Spider Lord then screeched loudly, shaking the entire dungeon cave, but he confidently told it to struggle all it liked. After all, the harder it is to open a treasure chest, the greater the excitement for what's inside. The next day, a small spider was heading toward the cup of tea, but it was cut in half before it even landed. The second ability Eugene gained from consuming the mana crystal of the Spider Lord was camouflage. By reinforcing his skin and using camouflage to replicate human skin, he was finally able to stand under sunlight. With that, the inconvenience of having to avoid sunlight was greatly reduced. A lady then noticed that he was walking around without his mask and asked why he had worn it all that time just to hide such a beautiful face. The noble ladies were deeply attracted to him and tried to flirt with him, but he felt uncomfortable, and it didn't help that Marion was teasing him as well. One of the ladies asked if his lineage included elven blood because he was so handsome. This surprised him, and he realized things were becoming more troublesome. Just then, Krima, who had been choking someone, overheard the comment and rushed over excitedly. Krima told him that his eyes were sharp even in pitch-black dungeons, his ears as keen as a wild dog's, his movements agile, and his strength monstrous, especially when he threw the spear. Krima added that there was no way he could be an ordinary human, making Eugene sweat nervously. But then, Krima proudly shouted that Eugene must have elf blood running through his veins. Krima then asked how he had managed to stay hidden all that time with such looks, since it was hard not to stand out in that region. Eugene concluded that Krima was oddly sharp but foolish, and he answered gracefully that he had never really tried to hide himself on purpose. The ladies, and even Krima, were stunned by his beauty. He simply gave them what they wanted and decided that if ever questioned again, he would use the excuse that there was an elf among his ancestors. What Eugene gained from consuming the mana crystal wasn't simply an ability. At the moment another mark disappeared from his body, memories he had never seen before flashed across his mind. He saw himself lying in an unknown place, a soft hand holding his, and in that unfamiliar space, a bell rang while everyone stared at him. He wondered who the woman in those memories was, and if those memories were even his. But then he snapped back to reality when someone shouted his name. Raban was begging for help, and Krema reminded Raban that he had become nothing but dead weight to Eugene. Raban replied that it was because Eugene wasn't human. Any normal human would have run away. Unfortunately, Raban's answer was wrong, and Eugene watched him playfully being beaten by Krema. The only thing Eugene truly remembered was his name. But due to recent events, he had started to develop a certain hunch. It felt as though, by erasing those marks one by one, he might be able to discover more about himself, not false titles like being a knight or having elven blood, but who he truly was. Later, they were all gathered in the Lord's room, and Lord Terwin informed them that he had heard of the successful dungeon opening. Krema introduced himself respectfully as the third son of Galfredik. Observing this, Eugene copied him and introduced himself as the eldest son of Eugene. The Lord praised them and handed something to Eugene. It was a certificate that guaranteed his identity as Jan of House Eugene. He accepted it and thanked the Lord warmly. However, the Lord then coughed harshly, which worried Kamara. The Lord confided in Kamara that his brother's ambitions weighed heavily on his mind, preventing him from dying in peace. Kamara assured his father that he would safely and properly guide the domain he had built over a lifetime. Yet, the Lord reminded Kamara that the domain was nothing more than dust and earth, and that a Lord must always look after his people, not his land, and lead them. With those final words, the Lord released his last breath and passed away. Eugene noticed that many grieved the Lord's death, but also realized that even in front of the same person's passing, not everyone shared the same sentiment. He was clearly referring to the selfish Verthal. Later, before the sun had set, Krema apologized to Kamara for leaving during the Lord's funeral, but Kamara understood that he had his own obligations. Krema then asked if Kamara was sure about staying, and he replied that he intended to enter the dungeon once more. It would be a waste to leave it after going through all the trouble to open it. Krema was disappointed by this response and mentioned that the Count of Evergrow would have liked Eugene very much. Krema then extended his hand and told him it was an honor to cross swords with a strong knight like him, though he hoped they wouldn't meet as enemies next time. Eugene hesitated at first, but eventually shook his hand. After Krema left, he ordered Partek to prepare for departure. Felid overheard the order and asked Partek why they were leaving when Eugene had just said they were staying. Partek replied that knights should ride horses as a rule, so they were heading to the trading company to acquire a horse for Eugene and to sell the monster's byproducts. Felid accepted this explanation and swore to assist Eugene as his retainer. However, Eugene told Felid that he wouldn't be needing his assistance for the time being, which confused Felid. Before he could fully grasp the meaning, he found himself lifting huge boxes and working in Marin, the greatest commercial city in the kingdom of Kaler. After dropping boxes of products, the mercenaries gathered to look, and Raban proudly informed them that the goods were dungeon byproducts brought in by Eugene. The mercenaries recognized Eugene's name as the one who had ripped off a troll's head while it was still alive in the dungeon, and they excitedly took a closer look at the items in front of them. Meanwhile, behind them, Felid was working hard to gather everything, but he noticed that Eugene was taking quite some time speaking with someone. Elsewhere, Billmore of the Palin Trading Company was trying to convince Eugene that the Pride of Mare would personally take responsibility for handling his byproducts. Eugene had been half doubtful when Partek mentioned knowing a reliable trading company, but he was surprised that Partek had introduced him to such a large-scale enterprise. He realized how valuable this was for someone like him, who was ignorant of human social networks. Billmore continued trying to persuade Eugene, but suddenly someone rudely opened the door, hitting Billmore and demanding to know who Eugene was, shocking both men. Partek whispered to Eugene that things might get awkward, which confused him. Partek explained that the man was a secretary working directly under the deputy manager of the Palin Trading Company, meaning he held more power than Billmore and had likely come to snatch the byproducts at a lower price. Partek advised Eugene to proceed very carefully if he wanted a stable trading partner, which piqued Eugene's interest. Billmore addressed the man as Grail and informed him that negotiations for an exclusive contract with Eugene were already underway. However, Grail simply ordered Billmore to step aside and not to challenge someone he couldn't possibly beat. Grail then said that there had been quite a bit of talk at the harbor about Eugene, the knight who tore off a troll's head with his bare hands in Terwin territory, and that he had brought in a mountain of dungeon byproducts. However, in truth, Grail believed these were unverified rumors, a transparent tactic by a naive newcomer to inflate the value of his goods. Grail continued, stating that the Palin Trading Company's deputy manager wanted to sign a contract with Eugene personally and suggested they leave the shabby place and follow him. Grail assumed Eugene was just a brute who only understood strength and intended to strip him of value. But suddenly, Grail felt an overwhelming pressure as Eugene stared at him. Gripped by fear, Grail quickly changed his tone and respectfully introduced himself to Eugene, explaining that it was a good opportunity. Eugene calmly asked what kind of opportunity he was referring to. Grail, now stammering, replied that it was a chance to sell the byproducts under better terms since the deputy manager would personally handle the deal. But Eugene wasn't convinced and intensified his stare, pushing Grail further into fear. Grail apologized again, insisting that he hadn't meant to be disrespectful. Still, Eugene didn't back down, and eventually Grail had no choice but to flee in panic, shouting that he would return another day. Billmore was moved to tears, having just rejected a contract with the deputy manager on Eugene's behalf, though he didn't fully grasp the implications. Nonetheless, he swore to offer Eugene his full and unwavering support, begging him to reach out whenever he needed anything. Billmore then excitedly asked when they would begin the proceedings, and Eugene replied that they would start immediately. Meanwhile, at the Palin Trading Company, Grail reported to the deputy manager that Eugene had rejected their offer and confirmed that he was no ordinary man. The deputy manager told Grail to raise his head, explaining that knights often acted out of honor or pride. She added that they could simply make things difficult for Eugene in their own way, since merchants like them had power through money and goods. She noted that it wouldn't be particularly hard, especially against a penniless knight without even a proper horse. She then ordered Grail to deliver a gift to Eugene, one too valuable for a poor knight to refuse. Elsewhere, Felid asked Eugene if he was ordering him to stay and continue selling the byproducts, to which Eugene replied yes. Felid didn't understand and asked if it was because his skills were still too lacking to accompany him. Trying to persuade him, Felid promised to begin sword training immediately. Eugene simply asked what a retainer's role was, and Felid responded that it was to serve the knight, both in battle and daily life. Eugene praised his understanding and explained that his current task was to serve in daily life as his retainer. He instructed Felid to sell the byproducts he brought back from battle and accumulate funds, declaring it the mission his knight had assigned him. He turned to leave, telling Felid he could figure out the rest while living and working with Billmore, who would teach him plenty about business, in all sorts of ways. Felid felt disappointed, but reminded himself that, if not for Eugene, he would have died long ago. Throwing a tantrum now would be disgraceful. However, his spirits lifted when Eugene told him that once they had saved up some funds, he would consider teaching him the sword and that someday Felid would have to support his battles as a true retainer. Felid was overjoyed and swore to follow his orders. The next day on the street, Eugene realized how quickly money vanished, even though they had only bought the bare essentials. Mirian cried as he hugged the empty money pouch, lamenting that their purse was so thin, even his heart felt hollow. While Mirian was acting, Eugene noticed something to the side, a set of shining armor. Partek told him it was plate armor, a true dream for every knight. When Eugene asked if it was expensive, Partek explained that it wasn't just expensive. Even wealthy knights often passed down such armor through generations, making it highly valuable. As Eugene stared at the armor, Raban suddenly shouted his name and ran toward them at full speed, informing them that a massive roamer horde had appeared just outside Marin. Raban explained that the roamers from the forest east of Marin were pushing into the city, and that local guilds were barely holding them back. Partek suggested they should participate in the subjugation, but Eugene asked why. Raban dramatically responded that unlike dungeons, which had owners and commission fees, roamer hunts were free. Marin, being a wealthy merchant city, was the perfect place to sell monster byproducts and loot at high prices with no transport costs. Raban shouted that it meant a huge pile of money, and without hesitation, Eugene said they should go, because there was no reason to hesitate. Suddenly, someone stopped them. It was Grail, holding a horse and panting with exhaustion. Grail proudly declared that the deputy manager had sent a warhorse as a gift. He explained that the horse had a glossy black mane as smooth as silk, tightly woven muscles, and was a thoroughbred with a distinguished pedigree. Eugene asked if the deputy manager had truly given it to him. Though intimidated by Eugene's gaze, Grail managed to answer yes, and assured him it was just a gift, with no strings attached. Eugene rushed over to the horse, which purred upon meeting him. He then leapt smoothly onto the saddle and told Grail to thank the deputy manager for the gift before riding off to rake in some money. Raban calmly told Partek that Eugene was already gone and asked what they should do. Partek, baffled by the question, shouted at him to run after Eugene, leaving Grail behind, stunned and speechless. Moments later, in Marin City's eastern outer forest, goblins were feasting on a human corpse when they heard a horse approaching. Before they could react, their heads were severed from their bodies. Mirian noted that the scale of the horde was enormous, as they could already see the roamers from their location. He guessed that most of the Marin guild members might already be dead. However, Eugene responded that it was good news. He didn't like sharing loot. A few minutes later, Eugene arrived at the scene and saw a few soldiers doing their best to fight off the roamers, while a knight was surrounded by orcs. The knight proudly shouted at the orcs that they would not advance unless they killed him. But as the orcs furiously closed in, his horse reared up in fear and bolted, throwing him to the ground. The knight, still trying to maintain his dignity, introduced himself as Madrika, but his confidence wavered when one of the orcs shattered the ground in front of him. He looked up to see the orcs ready to crush him into pieces. As they moved to finish him, Madrika screamed and called for help in fear. But luckily for him, Eugene threw a spear in time, piercing an orc's skull. Eugene rushed forward and effortlessly cut down the orc surrounding Madrika, saving him in mere seconds. Amazed, Madrika asked his name. Without noticing the approaching orc, Eugene raised his sword and threw it, killing the threat instantly. Madrika was impressed once again, but Eugene asked whether his name really mattered in that moment, pointing out it would have been meaningless had Madrika died. As the roamers charged at them, Madrika quickly stood, drew his sword, and shouted that once they returned from that hell on Earth, he would ask for his name again. Later, after the successful subjugation, Madrika dramatically recounted to the citizens that hundreds of goblins had rushed the city like a swarm of ants. However, they fought until the very end, and at the peak of crisis, a knight appeared who slew the goblins without mercy, securing victory and protecting Marin City. The citizens, however, were irritated by his dramatic storytelling and simply asked who the knight was. Madrika replied that it was Jan Eugene. Upon hearing the name, the crowd's interest was immediately piqued. They remembered Eugene as the knight who subjugated the dungeon in Tirwin territory. The citizens began shouting Eugene's name, hailing him as a hero, and praising him enthusiastically. Louis Pylene, the current mayor of Marin and former representative of the Palin Trading Company, observed the city's admiration for Eugene and remarked to his granddaughter, Priscilla, the deputy manager of the company, that the more Eugene's fame grew, the harder he would be to control. He asked her if she was sure it was wise to leave him unchecked. Priscilla assured Louis that everything was under control. In fact, she hoped Eugene's reputation would continue to rise, because the higher one soars, the greater the fear of the fall. She then asked Louis if he knew about the squire traveling with Eugene. He asked if she was referring to Felid, the one supplying the byproducts to their company. She confirmed it and revealed that her investigation had uncovered that Felid was an illegitimate child of the Tirwin family. She explained that it seemed Eugene was trying to secure a large fund through business while sponsoring the illegitimate child of the Tirwin family. If they could secure both, it might lead to a relationship with the future head of Tirwin. Louis was impressed by Priscilla's plan and realized that her intent was to buy the loyalty of a knight who was sponsoring a noble bloodline. He decided to send Eugene a gift and mask his true intentions by claiming it was the mayor's duty to reward the hero who saved the city. Louis told Priscilla he would put her in as a referral and instructed her to make good use of the opportunity, which she confidently accepted and thanked him for. Later that night, at Priscilla's mansion, she sipped her tea calmly and reflected that those who thirst will eventually come to the water's edge. As a merchant, there was only one thing to do. She smirked, planning to dig a well before the thirst even came, waiting until Eugene drank from it restlessly and without resistance or doubt. What she didn't know was that Eugene didn't drink water, but blood. Eventually, her guest room door opened, and she welcomed her guest with a wicked smile. She called Eugene Marin's hero, hoping to flatter him, but Eugene calmly stated that he had come to express his thanks. He asked if she was the branch owner of the Palin Trading Company, to which she replied yes and offered him a seat. As she watched him, she noted that he was not only beautiful, but also terrifying, a knight capable of decapitating a troll with his bare hands. He was unlike any knight she had met before. She complimented the armor he wore, a gift from Louis, and informed him that it had been commissioned from the best workshop in Marin. She explained that it was forged from a blend of Elsic iron and ogre bone, granting it a hardness that even a dragon's fangs would struggle to pierce. She asked him how it felt. He replied that he could count on its sturdiness in the next dungeon subjugation, and thanked her for the excellent lodging and meals, noting that his mercenaries were in good condition as a result. However, he also stated that he had not done any of it in expectation of receiving rewards. She laughed at his humility and was about to bring up her proposal, but Eugene stood before she could finish her sentence. He told her he would take his leave as he was a busy man. Surprised, she asked if he was leaving already, but he simply turned around and replied that he might stop in Marin again once the Tirwin dungeon was subjugated. That was all he could offer her. To her further disappointment, he added that his contract only covered dungeon byproducts and that this would be their final meeting. He intended to focus on collecting mana crystals from now on. Shocked, she called out, stopping him in his tracks. She asked if there truly was nothing more for them to discuss, but he turned and asked what exactly she meant. She accused him of playing dumb and said there was a limit to such behavior. She reminded him that they had gifted him the most expensive full-plate armor in Marin, a pedigreed warhorse, their finest hotel accommodations, and high-end cuisine. She pointed out that the byproducts he had sold were not nearly enough to cover even half of those services. She asked if he was truly going to pretend he didn't understand the cost of everything he had received. She added that he should have learned by now, as a former squire, that nothing in the world came free. Finally, she threatened to expose him, saying that if he refused to repay them, the people of Marin who praised him would discover that he was nothing more than a shameless knight who knew no honor. This enraged him. Eugene didn't respond at first, but then smirked and said it was ridiculous. He reminded her that she had ordered him around upon their first meeting and had dumped unwanted gifts on him as she pleased, yet now she was demanding payment for those very gifts. He then glared at her and asked whether a mere merchant was trying to threaten him. Her people were terrified, while his merchants were satisfied. He approached her and told her she had misunderstood him. He informed her once again that he had already made a contract with the Palin Trading Company through Bilmore, and as long as she continued to quietly purchase his goods, he couldn't care less what the people of Marin said about him. Leaning closer, he warned her that, as she herself had said, everything has a price. So if she continued to run her mouth, she would soon find out for herself what that price truly meant. Turning around once more, he stated that from the outside it only looked like Palin was colluding with the city of Marin to persecute the knight who had saved it. He warned them that if that's how things continued, then during the next crisis, not a single knight would be willing to step forward for Marin. Robin and Partek followed him as he walked out, but before they left, Partek turned to Priscilla and remarked that it was truly unfortunate. He added that if her approach had been different, they certainly could have built a good relationship. Stunned by a mix of fear and embarrassment, Priscilla nevertheless managed to calmly beg Eugene to stop. She bowed before him and sincerely apologized, admitting she had been discourteous. She acknowledged that her desire to gain the upper hand had clouded her judgment and asked to start their relationship anew. She explained that they would maintain the existing contract with Bilmore but wanted to add a few clauses and swore that there would be nothing for him to worry about. Priscilla had encountered countless knights who wagged their tails the moment lavish patronage was offered. To her, most so-called knights were fools chasing fame and wealth. But she realized Eugene was different. He was too dangerous to toy with. She cursed herself for misjudging him and now understood why her merchant instincts screamed that she mustn't let him go. Fortunately for her, Eugene sat down, agreeing to at least hear her out, but warned that it had better be a very tempting offer. She felt immense relief and thanked him for his mercy. Later, Eugene and his mercenaries were on their journey again. Miriam was admiring his new suit and loudly declaring that he was the coolest in the whole world, while Eugene simply brushed off the compliment. Partek informed him that he had secured a very favorable contract and explained that the Palin Trading Company was so large and far-reaching that it couldn't be ignored. Partek added that Palin had hundreds of branches throughout the Roman Empire, with Marin as their main base, and they primarily conducted business with noble houses that owned local magic domains, such as House Tyrwin. Partek assured him that Palin had been extremely generous in offering unlimited dungeon and labyrinth mediation across its branches. At that level, it might even be more beneficial than receiving an appointment from a noble house. Partek then praised Eugene for his brilliant push-and-pull negotiation. But Eugene admitted he had only said those things because he was annoyed. Suddenly, they heard someone mockingly ask if simply wearing shiny armor made someone a knight, and a bald man teased Eugene for having a pretty face that couldn't possibly wield a sword properly. Miriam was angry, but Eugene ignored it. Kamara then approached to greet him, and Eugene dismounted his horse, asking if he should call him Lord Tyrwin. Kamara told him to use whatever title he preferred, and commented that Eugene had changed quite a bit. Eugene asked about the current situation, and Kamara replied that instead of being humbled, Verthel had simply hired new mercenaries again. But something was off. Eugene asked what he meant, and Kamara reminded him of the mercenaries who had been killed by the Black Wolves, as they were a particularly nasty group. For some reason, the mercenaries Verthel had brought this time gave off a similar feeling. Kamara then informed him that he would serve as the commander of the dungeon subjugation party. The bald man spat in anger at the announcement and asked sarcastically if he'd become commander if Eugene died in the dungeon, which made his group laugh and angered Kamara. The bald man clarified that it wasn't something he really wanted to say, but a dungeon wasn't a picnic. He added that human life in a dungeon was as cheap as a fly's, and they had to prepare for the worst. Smirking, he looked at Eugene and sarcastically said he would be counting on him. Eugene calmly responded that it wasn't a bad idea. If he died, the bald man could take over as commander. He then announced that they had countermeasures in place and would move forward at once. Miriam complained about the bald bastard, and Eugene assured him that he already knew. It was clearly one of Verthel's tricks, intending to use the mercenaries to get rid of him inside the dungeon. Eugene and his mercenaries entered the dungeon first, followed closely by the suspicious mercenaries. Eugene had a feeling the subjugation might actually be entertaining. A moment later, Eugene was busy killing roamers along the way, neatly piling up their corpses. He moved with no effort, while the bald man began to realize that Eugene's reputation wasn't exaggerated. Eugene was standing at the front handling the work of 100 men alone, while the other mercenaries practically just stood and watched. To the bald man, Eugene was like an overwhelming wall, a massive shield before them. He gripped his sword tightly, waiting for a single opening, just one chance to let his poison-coated blade graze Eugene's infuriating face. Eugene then informed everyone that up ahead was the area where only mid-rank monsters appeared, and from that point on, he could no longer guarantee their lives. Only those willing to take that risk should follow. He emphasized especially to the bald man and his squad that only those confident in keeping up were allowed to proceed. The bald man confidently replied that if Eugene was going, so were they, believing it to be their chance. Raban chose to follow, but Partek stopped him and told Eugene that they would wait for a bit. Raban was confused, and Partek explained that Eugene had a different plan in mind. Deeper in the dungeon, Eugene recalled the last time he had come with Crema. It was far less entertaining without him. Thinking back, Eugene realized that while he had only observed Crema briefly, he could tell Crema was an exceptional leader, one who knew how to lift morale at key moments and personally take on the most dangerous roles at the front line. With Crema, they could have cleared this dungeon safely, even with a mismatched party. Curious, he wondered how Crema would have handled the current situation, then turned to see the mercenaries drawing their weapons behind him. Eugene was pleased they had finally decided to drop the half-hearted act. He told them that if they were so eager to die, he would gladly oblige. Mirian gathered water around him, confusing the mercenaries. But Mirian simply laughed and unleashed a strong wave, extinguishing all their torches. Panic spread as they were plunged into darkness. Some couldn't believe Eugene could use magic. The bald man tried to calm his group and ordered them to relight their torches, unaware of the red eyes watching them in the dark. One by one, they were killed. In the pitch black, all they could hear were the screams of their comrades. Even when they tried to fight back, they could see nothing, and they were slashed and stabbed in the chaos. After a minute of screaming and begging, the bald man finally managed to spark a light using 2 stones. He cursed them, desperate for flame. But before he succeeded, he noticed the screams had stopped. The silence made him sweat with fear. Suddenly he heard footsteps approaching. Eugene whispered, asking if he needed fire. Then Eugene took the bald man's hands and helped him light the stones, mockingly telling him that he'd help if he was having trouble breathing, and that human eyes were terribly inconvenient in the dark. When the fire was finally lit, Eugene asked if he could see more clearly now, if he could see who was hunting and who was being hunted. The bald man saw a massive dead monster in front of him, and his entire squad killed behind him. All he could do was curse hopelessly and call Eugene a damn monster. Eugene opened his mouth and bit into the bald man's neck to drain his blood. Later, after the subjugation in Tyrwin Castle, Kamara rushed to meet Eugene and found him in the meeting room. Kamara, who was followed by Verthel, asked Eugene if the news was true. Verthel also asked what all the commotion was about, but Eugene simply replied that they could hear it directly from the person involved. He then threw the bald bastard in front of the brothers, and Verthel recognized him. The bald bastard admitted that he had tried to kill Eugene on Verthel Tyrwin's orders. However, Verthel claimed that the bald bastard was always spouting nonsense and had finally lost his mind. Kamara furiously demanded to know how far Verthel was planning to go, but Verthel snapped back that Kamara was the one who needed to come to his senses, and asked him if he truly believed the words of someone clearly insane. Verthel then leaned closer to the bald man and ordered him to explain himself properly. However, the bald man, under Eugene's control, suddenly rushed to the window, shouting that trash like him deserved to die. He jumped out, prompting Kamara to call out in panic, but the bald man was impaled on a statue's sword below, dying instantly. Verthel proudly told Kamara that the bald man had clearly gone mad after seeing someone torn apart by a monster, and asked if it wasn't more strange to believe Eugene's ravings. But Kamara replied that what was truly strange was feeling relieved that someone had just died, infuriating Verthel even more. Verthel then shouted at Eugene, claiming he was no different, and asking if he had no pride as a knight, accusing him of slandering him with absurd paranoid delusions. Calmly, Eugene asked Verthel if he could truly claim innocence in his honor as a knight. Verthel confidently answered yes. Eugene then drew his sword and pointed it at Verthel, declaring a trial by combat and staking both his knightly honor and reputation on the truth. Verthel, enraged and seeing Eugene's proud expression, accepted the challenge without thinking. Later, in the arena of Tyrwin Castle, everyone whispered about the rumors that Verthel had ordered an assassination. They were angry that he continued to cause trouble. Eugene and Verthel stood facing each other, with Kamara as the official witness. Kamara announced that since both sides' claims sharply conflicted, a duel would determine the truth, and that the truth would be granted to the victor in accordance with the righteous will of the gods. He then offered his wish that guidance be given to the winner. Verthel charged first, swinging his sword at Eugene, but Eugene blocked it easily. When Verthel attempted a second strike, Eugene deflected that one as well. Disappointed by Verthel's skill, Eugene recalled how Verthel had once chased him in a past life. And now he couldn't believe he'd been hunted for over a decade by someone so pitiful. Eugene launched a counterattack, catching Verthel off guard. Although Verthel managed to block the strike, he couldn't hold out for long. Eventually, Eugene disarmed him and pushed him to the ground. Instead of finishing him off, Eugene ordered him to pick up his sword. Verthel immediately complied. Kamara watched in silence, knowing that Verthel's swordsmanship was not poor by any means. Yet even a novice could see that Eugene was overwhelmingly stronger. Eugene then raised his sword and severed Verthel's hand. Before he could do more, Kamara shouted that it was enough. Eugene replied that the duel was not yet over and ordered Kamara to step aside. Kamara refused, explaining that he could not simply stand by and watch his brother die. Since Verthel could no longer fight, he could not prove his claim through the duel, which meant the victory went to Eugene. However, Verthel, consumed by pride, screamed that he could still fight and that he would kill Eugene himself. Kamara ordered him to stop and informed him the match was already decided. As a knight, he should accept his crimes and repent in prison. But Verthel couldn't accept it. He shoved Kamara aside and charged at Eugene, screaming that if it weren't for him, if only he had never appeared in his life, he would never have had to suffer such humiliation. Eugene raised his sword. Before Verthel realized it, he could no longer move. He saw his armor on the ground and his older brother upside down. Eugene told him that he should have taken the last chance his brother gave him. Verthel's head lay on the ground, separated from his body. Everyone was silent as Eugene quietly left the arena, leaving Kamara to mourn his foolish younger brother. The next day, in Marin City, Eugene was walking through a corridor when Mirian asked him if he didn't think it was a pity. Eugene asked what he meant. Mirian replied that the bald bastard had been the first familiar he had ever made, but Eugene used him to force a confession and then discarded him without hesitation. Eugene replied that it wasn't a pity because the bald man had such a weak mind that he couldn't even handle becoming a familiar. Had he left him that way, it would have been obvious to others that he had become a vampire. He then asked Mirian if he truly thought he would let someone live after they had bared their fangs at him. Mirian remarked that he was truly heartless and reminded him that a vampire should command countless slaves, since slaves were a symbol of power. But Eugene said he didn't need them. As he reached for the doorknob of the room, he thought to himself that turning weaklings into familiars would only bring trouble, as cleaning up after them was more of a burden than they were worth. As he opened the door, he heard someone mention Krima's name. Billmore was reporting to Priscilla, saying that there had been chaos and it had already been 2 weeks since Krima entered the labyrinth. Both were surprised when they sensed Eugene's presence. Billmore rushed to welcome him back, but Eugene brushed past him and directly asked Priscilla what had happened to Krima, startling her. Minutes later, Eugene was riding his horse at full speed, recalling what Priscilla had told him, that 2 weeks ago, Krima had taken part in a labyrinth subjugation in Count Evergrove's domain and had gone missing alone inside the labyrinth. She added that they had thoroughly searched the entire mid-rank monster area but found no trace of his personal belongings. Krima had failed to return from the high-rank monster zone. Hearing this, Eugene rushed toward Count Evergrove's territory to save his friend. Days later, he arrived at Count Evergrove's mansion where the Lord welcomed him warmly. The Lord told him that he had heard much about him and remarked that Eugene was far younger and more handsome than the rumors suggested. Eugene respectfully bowed and thanked the Lord for the warm reception. The eldest son of House Evergrove, Jevin Evergrove, stated that the situation was urgent and suggested they continue the discussion inside his office. Once seated, Jevin explained that Krima had let his ambitions get the better of him. They had planned to grant Krima an appointment if he succeeded in the raid, but they didn't expect him to enter the upper levels of the labyrinth on his own initiative. Eugene asked if Jevin was saying Krima had acted independently, to which Jevin replied yes and explained that the upper levels Krima had entered were an area House Evergrove had been unable to touch for over 100 years, as it was where the so-called Master of the Labyrinth resided. Eugene asked what the Master of the Labyrinth was, and Lugates, a knight of House Evergrove, replied that it was a being who ruled over the entire labyrinth. Smirking, Lugates added that Krima had been blinded by the lure of achievements, pressed forward too recklessly, and ended up causing trouble for many. Jevin introduced Lugates as the one who had led the subjugation party alongside Krima during the incident. Lugates greeted Eugene sarcastically and mentioned that they shared an amusing fact. He was the Evergrove tournament champion, meaning he had once defeated Krima in the tournament. Eugene asked whether that detail was truly important in the current situation. Jevin said that Krima was too valuable a talent for them to lose and sincerely apologized for the current circumstances, noting that from what he had heard, Eugene and Krima shared a deep friendship. Eugene agreed reluctantly, which made Mirian laugh silently to himself. Jevin assured Eugene that they would offer their full support as Krima's close friend and informed him that, for the past 100 years, every attempt House Evergrove made to subjugate the upper levels had ended with the entire party going missing. Because of this, once someone had been missing for over a month, they officially declared them dead. Jevin then asked if Eugene understood what he meant, and warned him that Krima had been missing for 3 weeks. If they couldn't find him within the next week, there would be no hope. Eugene immediately stood up to begin the search, but Jevin stopped him, stating that a labyrinth was not a place to enter like a city marketplace. He told him a subjugation party would be prepared within 3 days, with Lugates leading, and advised Eugene to rest and recover until then. Though suspicious, Eugene thanked him. Before he left, Jevin informed him that they had recently hired a mage, and that the mage would be assigned to assist him as additional support. Later, in the streets, Mirian was furious at Lugates' attitude. He believed that Krima, while perhaps appearing a little lacking, was too strong to have gone missing easily. Mirian cursed both Lugates and Jevin, while Eugene noticed several inconsistencies. He remembered that before parting ways, Krima had told him he would have the credit for the dungeon opening raid officially recognized and would receive an appointment from the Count of Evergrove. Krima had also asked him to join him and make an impression. Eugene was sure Krima's appointment should have already been decided, yet now it seemed he had been subjected to another test. This made Eugene question why they had changed their minds. Furthermore, he doubted that Krima would act impulsively out of greed. If Krima had really entered the labyrinth, Eugene was certain he would have assembled a competent team and proceeded with caution. Suddenly he heard shouting and people rushing. Someone was screaming that the Messiah would come. An old man on a stage, standing before a strange eye symbol, announced that on the day a red shadow was cast over the moon, the goddess of victory would grow wrathful and descend to wipe out the land. Despite the chaos, the people pushed forward to listen. The old man declared that the calamity had already begun, and that repeated tremors near the labyrinth had caused wild beasts in the nearby mountains to die en masse. He added that a highly skilled knight had recently disappeared in the labyrinth, prompting Miriam to realize the man was referring to Krima. The old man instructed the crowd to sprinkle fresh calf blood at the labyrinth gate and to offer the remaining meat in a ritual feast, claiming that if they did so, the Messiah would descend to save the land steeped in crimson. The townspeople panicked at the prophecy. Miriam commented that the entire atmosphere was not that of a normal town. A child handed Eugene a flyer, shouting that God was enraged, but it wasn't too late to believe. Eugene read the flyer, which described the deaths of wild beasts near the labyrinth due to earthquakes. He wondered if part of the labyrinth had collapsed and decided that 3 days was too long to wait. He told Miriam they would scout ahead on their own to look for Krima, much to Miriam's delight. Unbeknownst to them, a girl nearby was eavesdropping. As they passed, the woman whispered that she was surprised to see a vampire walking around. Caught off guard, Eugene immediately turned and dragged her into an alley. He pinned her against a wall and demanded her identity, asking how she had recognized him so quickly. He warned her that if she didn't answer, he would crush her neck. She pleaded for him to let go so she could speak, but he refused. Finally, she revealed that she was a blood shadow. Miriam found the term familiar, then suddenly remembered what it was. He rushed to stop Eugene from killing her and informed him that she was a mage from the Blood Shadow School, a school that had served vampires for generations. Even so, Eugene didn't let go until it was too late and she lost consciousness. A moment later, the mage awoke and angrily asked why he had attacked her without a word. She shouted that he should at least release someone's neck before expecting them to answer. Eugene apologized, but Miriam scolded her for speaking with a villain's tone in the first place. After clearing her throat, she formally introduced herself as Sirenoar Romari of the Blood Shadow School, retainers to vampires. She explained that due to their school's affinity, they could instantly sense a vampire's presence. She also revealed that Jevin had asked her to find Eugene, and that she had heard he and Krima shared a deep friendship, causing Eugene to swear that he'd sew Krima's mouth shut when he found him. She then revealed that she had also been part of the subjugation party during Krima's disappearance, which surprised him. When asked for details, she explained that at the time, she had needed a monster byproduct, so she had personally applied for the labyrinth subjugation announced by Count Evergrow. The Evergrow labyrinth was notorious for its difficulty, but since it had been discovered 100 years ago, all areas except the upper levels had been fully cleared. The group had moved forward with relative ease. While advancing deep inside, a sudden and tremendous roar shook the entire labyrinth, and the ground beneath her feet collapsed. Just as she was about to fall, someone grabbed her. Krima, who had been guarding the rear, saved her, falling into the depths in her place. Thanks to him, she survived and regained her senses. However, everyone else believed the earthquake had occurred because Krima had opened the door to the upper levels. She told Eugene that she had survived thanks to Krima, and that she felt obligated to tell the truth, hence why she had come to find him. She added that she never imagined he would be a vampire. Eugene, as he suspected, realized Jevin's story didn't match. He wondered if Jevin had lied to him directly or if someone else had twisted the facts. Sirenoir then revealed something else. When she looked down into the depths where Krima had fallen, she saw an enormous eye drawn on the ground. Eugene asked for confirmation, and she confidently affirmed it. He then recalled the flyers handed out earlier by the cultists in the plaza, and was stunned to realize that the image on the flyers matched the symbol she described. Meanwhile, in the underground depths of the labyrinth, cultists were in the midst of worship. Their leader stood before them and ordered everyone to welcome him with all their hearts, the one who would lead them to salvation, for he would soon awaken. 3 days later, Eugene stood in front of the labyrinth alongside his mercenaries, while Lugates stood with his soldiers. Lugates asked if he was excited at the thought of seeing his close friend again, and remarked that he hoped there would be no need to carry out a corpse. Eugene replied that Krima was not the type to die so easily, which surprised Lugates, before causing him to burst into laughter. Eugene glared at Lugates. He had wanted to enter the labyrinth days ago, but he was certain that Krima's disappearance wasn't an accident. That was why he chose to observe Lugates' movements closely. He believed that if Krima had survived for 3 weeks, another 3 days wouldn't be the end of him. Suddenly, several figures in robes approached and introduced themselves as Templars from a monastery under House Evergrow. They greeted Eugene and excitedly expressed how moved they were by his willingness to risk himself for his friend. They offered to fight alongside him in the name of God, which surprised Eugene even more, and made Miriam laugh, since the man had just offered divine aid to a vampire. Lugates noted that Templars normally only followed divine orders, and that it was rare for them to take interest in a knight. He added that Eugene could consider changing his class to Holy Knight later, if he wished, prompting more laughter from Miriam and Sirenoir. Eugene, however, continued to glare at Lugates with suspicion. He then ordered Partek to step aside with him for a moment, and Partek followed immediately. A short time later, the group was inside the labyrinth. After some progress, they paused to rest briefly. Miriam was amazed by the amount of water energy present, while Eugene observed that unlike a dungeon, the labyrinth was an artificial space, deliberately arranged to ensure that survival was at least possible, yet monsters still inhabited it. He thought to himself that if things ever turned dire, hiding in a place like this and living on might not be such a bad option. Suddenly, Lugates approached and commented that it was indeed a fitting place for evil beings to lurk and hide. He complimented Eugene on his skills, pointing out that not a single man had died so far. But Eugene merely asked how much farther it was to the spot where Krima disappeared. Lugates told him not to be so impatient and sarcastically asked if he truly trusted Krima, before warning that the one Eugene should trust most was him, as House Evergrow had already fully grasped the labyrinth's traps. Still, he admitted there were casualties every time. Laughing, Lugates told him to consider them offerings to hope, since they would all make it out alive, an attitude that angered Eugene. Suddenly, the labyrinth began to shake. Lugates immediately ordered everyone to prepare, explaining that the layout of the labyrinth was changing. He told Eugene that they had reached the section where the walls constantly shifted and where the shortcut to the upper levels could be found. Cyranoir shouted that it was an earthquake, but Eugene focused his attention on Lugates and asked where exactly the shortcut was. Lugates replied that it was right where he stood. Then, slowly, the walls began to shift and closed in, separating Eugene from Lugates. The area changed around them. Cyranoir asked in a panic where they were, but Eugene quickly concluded that it hadn't been a natural earthquake at all. Krima had been framed, caught in a trap that Lugates had clearly seen coming. He was still trying to figure out Lugates' goal when Cyranoir called to him. Turning back, he was stunned to see Krima tied to a cross, bleeding heavily. He rushed over and checked his friend's pulse. Relieved that Krima was still alive, he knew that if they got him out and treated him quickly, he could be saved. But then Miriam shouted that something was off. He had been sensing something below them for a while. Suddenly, a strong wind began swirling around them, and a bright red light appeared above. From the wall, two enormous red eyes with sharp teeth and a long tail emerged. It was a minotaur, its body cloaked in pink flames. Cyranoir asked in disbelief how a minotaur could be there, but Eugene quickly ordered her to protect Krima. He then rushed at the monster, using stones to leap into the air. He raised his sword to strike, but before he could land a blow, the minotaur unleashed a blinding flash of light and a powerful wind that hurled him away, along with Cyranoir, who had been guarding Krima. The minotaur drew a black scythe and raised it above Krima. Eugene panicked at the sight. Before he could react, the monster slammed the scythe shaft into the ground, causing a massive shockwave that shattered the area around them. Krima fell through the fractured floor, and Eugene, even more frantic, dashed toward him and tried to catch him. But a magic circle activated beneath Eugene, halting his movement. Furious, he demanded to know what Cyranoir was doing. She explained that the monster was a minotaur, an extremely powerful creature even among high-rank monsters. She added that even a vampire could die fighting it, which enraged him further. He pointed his sword at her, warning that she had overstepped her bounds. But she simply apologized and explained that she couldn't just stand by and watch a vampire charge to his death. She warned him that if he rushed in recklessly, his chances of victory were slim, and if he truly wanted to save Krima, he would need to calm down and properly assess the situation. After taking a moment to cool his head, Cyranoir muttered that she couldn't believe a minotaur was inside the labyrinth. She had expected a cyclops at worst. While Eugene was thinking, the wall behind them opened. Then a voice mocked her for underestimating Cyranoir, surprised that she could even use earth magic. It was Lugates. He said that she had barely survived thanks to Krima, and that he had assumed she was just an eccentric who could make chimeras at best. Eugene immediately grabbed Lugates by the neck, furious that he was the one who had left Krima in such a bloody state. Lugates teasingly raised both hands and explained that he had only brought Eugene to Krima because he looked so desperate to see his friend again, but noted that Eugene was much ruder than the rumors had suggested. Then, with ease, Lugates broke Eugene's grip and tightly grabbed his hand. Eugene, angered, rushed to pull off Lugates' glove, revealing a pink mark on the back of his hand. Cyranoir recognized the mark, and Eugene asked if he was correct in guessing that Lugates' brute strength wasn't his own. Cyranoir explained that the mark was a magic formula used to inherit someone else's power. Initially, it had been used to pass power between humans, but once people began inheriting the strength of non-human beings, it was completely banned, making it a forbidden spell. However, Lugates scoffed at the idea, calling it foolish. He claimed that forbidden spell was just a cowardly excuse made up by those who wanted to monopolize power. Then the robed men surrounding them spread out as Lugates declared that they were the chosen ones. When despair descended upon the world, they would be the ones selected by God to survive. Eugene calmly responded that he understood now. Lugates had defeated Krima using borrowed strength, then had the audacity to boast as if it were his own. At that moment, Eugene released his true power, swearing furiously to make Lugates understand exactly where he stood. He dashed toward him, and when Lugates blocked, the resulting wave of power was so strong that Cyranoir wondered aloud if an ordinary vampire could truly release such energy. Lugates elbowed Eugene away and realized that Eugene had been hiding his strength too. Lugates then drove his hand into Eugene's stomach, saying he had no intention of holding back. Suddenly, the ground collapsed beneath Eugene and Cyranoir. As they fell, Lugates called out that every trap in the labyrinth had already been figured out, and that Eugene should fall nicely to his death. Eugene shouted for Cyranoir, who quickly created a magic circle to catch them. Eugene immediately used the circle as a foothold and leapt forward. Just before the wall above closed, he threw his sword toward Lugates. Half of the blade managed to pierce through, slicing Lugates slightly on the face. Lugates was stunned. He had heard Eugene was strong, but what he had just seen far exceeded his expectations. He knew that if he had faced Eugene head-on, victory wouldn't have been guaranteed. At that moment, he was relieved that his decision to use Krima as bait instead of killing him outright had been the right one. He was satisfied that the final sacrifice would soon be offered. Cyranoir did her best to create more magic circles to reduce the impact of their fall. Although she couldn't fully form another, she managed to slow her descent slightly, still hitting the ground harder than expected. Eugene, on the other hand, landed on his feet. Before she could even stand up, she saw Eugene rushing off and called after him, asking where he was going. He ignored her and disappeared from sight. Left with no choice, she pulled herself up and hurried to follow, complaining to herself. But she froze in place when she saw Eugene holding Krima in his arms. Eugene asked her if she could save him. She admitted that healing magic wasn't her specialty, but Eugene pressed again, saying that wasn't an answer. Resigned, she shut up and decided to do her best to heal Krima. Miriam then told Eugene that there was no exit in that place. Eugene asked if there were any walls they could tunnel through, but Miriam replied that there were none. The place seemed to be the farthest end of the labyrinth, a sealed boss room. Miriam added that he had meant to mention it earlier. There was so much water energy in the air that he had thought he could do something, but even as a water spirit, he couldn't control it, especially not the strange pool of blood that felt out of place. Eugene looked around and noticed a swarm of eyes embedded in the walls. He asked Miriam why he couldn't control the water, and Miriam replied that he could only control the blood of the dead, which meant the owner of that blood was still alive. Suddenly, the blood beside them erupted. Slowly, a monster emerged from the pool, the same minotaur from before, Cyranoar, who had been tending to Krima, panicked. Eugene ordered Miriam to find them a way out, and Miriam agreed. Eugene then drew his half-shattered sword and faced the massive minotaur. But he was worried. Krima still couldn't move. He reminded himself that he had to prevent the minotaur from moving freely. He charged at the creature. In response, it released a swarm of blades and launched them at once. Eugene managed to dodge everyone, sliding behind the minotaur and swinging his sword at its legs, but the blade did nothing. It shattered instantly. The minotaur opened its mouth and began spitting flames. Eugene narrowly avoided them, but while he was dodging, it threw more blades from behind. He sensed them just in time, ducked low, and leapt into the air to avoid being struck. He landed on nearby pillars, realizing that an ordinary sword wouldn't do. Eugene then drew blood from his own body, wrapped it around his shattered blade, and reforged it into a scythe. Throwing off his silver cape, he leapt toward the minotaur and slashed its back with his new weapon. Though the strike landed, it was shallow. Before he could follow up, the minotaur grabbed him and hurled him forward, sending him crashing through a pillar and slamming hard into a wall. Cyranoar, witnessing everything, called out to Krima, pleading for him to wake up. His friend was in danger. Fortunately, Eugene stirred, groaning as he came to. He realized Cyranoar had been right. High-rank monsters were on an entirely different level. As the minotaur released a powerful gust of wind and summoned another wave of blades, Eugene cursed under his breath. The blades rushed toward him, and with no strength left, he was struck multiple times. Cyranoar called out in fear, but Eugene couldn't respond. He had no energy to fight back. The sensation of powerlessness crept in again, one he had become endlessly familiar with for over a decade. He thought he would be used to it by now. And yet, somehow, being powerless still hurt just as much. One of the blades pierced his stomach. As he lay bleeding, he looked toward Krima, just as Krima's eyes suddenly opened, shocked to see Eugene dying before him.